subscribe and, like the video.
Just after the morning rush hour, central Munich. Scenes that pour fuel on Germany's political disputes over immigration, with the far right soaring in the polls, ahead of the most significant general election since reunification. A child's pram and a shoe lie crushed in the street. 28 people rushed to hospital after someone, later confirmed to be a failed Afghan asylum seeker, had rammed his car into a crowd.
A car crashed into the back of a demonstration. We saw the whole thing. They were walking along the whole street, and when they crossed the intersection, a car drove into the back of the crowd.
As an arrest video emerged, the German Chancellor was forced to comment on the divisive issue currently haunting German politics. The alleged attacker, who'd come to Germany as an unaccompanied minor, reportedly had his asylum application rejected nearly a decade ago. So why was he still in the country?
This perpetrator cannot count on any leniency. He must be punished and he must leave the country.
He'd also reportedly been in trouble with the police for drugs and theft, but whether he was operating alone or part of a group isn't yet known.
At the moment, we can neither rule out nor confirm other perpetrators. There are no leads at the moment. The background is currently being investigated.
There have been several lethal attacks by newcomers to Germany in the last few years. 6 died when a Saudi man drove into a Christmas market in Magdeburg.
Okay, the Saudi man was literally an anti-Islam AfD supporter and was not a newcomer to Germany. That's crazy. This, of course, is going to absolutely ignite the same fear-mongering that already existed, which is truly beneficial for AfD's purposes in general.
He turned out to be a far-right anti-Islam activist who'd renounced his faith. Still, Germany's insurgent far-right party, the AfD, say these acts of extreme violence are precisely why their controversial policy of re-migration is so popular. The AfD leader, Alice Weidel, who's been courting support from Hungarian hardliner Viktor Orban, today repeated her Trumpian demands for mass deportations to reverse the immigration started by Angela Merkel in 2015.
Meine Pflichten.
The AfD...
It's crazy because I said this yesterday. Like I just said, everyone in Western Europe has made fun of Viktor Orban, and every single country is going to have little Viktor Orbans prop up left and right. Terrifying predicament. What should Germans do about the terror attacks? I mean, it's always the same. Violence is violence, chatter. You address the needs of the population. That's it. Unless you're asking that question because you personally think that like there is something different to the Islamic style violence that's taken place or some shit, Contrary to the initial information, the suspect had a residence and work permit. This was reported in German media at 8:17. This deportation agitation in German media was completely off the rails today. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because it plays a role in propping up the most like right-wing positions possible. The media loves hitting the panic drums. Social Democrats have failed to fight fascism, in many cases helped accelerate it while being the most smug, out-of-touch people on the planet. Yeah.
They are currently polling second, but are unlikely to assume power as Germany's main parties refuse to work with them. Meanwhile, to Munich enter US Vice President J.D. Vance and a multitude of other world leaders for the Global Security Conference. On the agenda, Russia, the Middle East, and much more. But today's carnage provokes more immediate questions, for it also emerged this afternoon that police had foiled an attempted bomb attack on an asylum shelter near Dresden by someone described as a German national. How will today's events affect the election in 10 days' time?
Hamas says it will move forward with the next hostage release Saturday as part of the ceasefire deal with Israel. This comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is threatening to end the ceasefire if Hamas doesn't free all 9 living hostages it agreed to release in phase 1 of the agreement. Now Hamas says Egyptian and Qatari mediators will work to, quote, remove obstacles and close gaps to allow the exchange to happen. Foreign correspondent Britt Clennett joins me live from Jerusalem. Britt, what's the latest on this ceasefire deal and this pending exchange of hostages and Palestinian prisoners? And what are these obstacles that still have to be removed?
Hi, Diane. Yeah, positive signs that this will go ahead as planned. Hamas saying that it is committed to implementing the ceasefire deal and will continue releasing the hostages within the agreed time frame. That follows talks in Cairo, Hamas, and saying that Egyptian and Qatari mediators had decided, as you say, to remove obstacles to the deal. There was no immediate comment from Israel. Obviously, both sides up until now have been accusing each other of violating the ceasefire deal, and there was a lot of concern from both major stakeholders.
This article confirms the misinfo before and explains more. Please read so people know Chatter was right. Summary at the top. Germany Munich car attack injures 30. Suspect detained. At least 30 people were injured after a car drove into a trade union march in Munich. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has called for the suspect, an Afghan national legally in Germany, to be deported. Police say the suspected perpetrator, an Afghan national, was detained at the scene. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has called for the suspect to be deported. Opposition leader Friedrich Merz said something has to change. The Taliban say they are prepared to cooperate on deportations in return for consular presence in Germany. Contrary to earlier reports, Bavarian ministers have said that the suspect was not subject to deportation and was in possession of a valid residency permit. Weidel says under the AfD, the man wouldn't have been here in the first place. Alice Weidel, the chancellor candidate for the far-right Alternative für Deutschland, has insisted that the 24-year-old Afghan national detained on suspicion of driving his car into a trade union march in Munich on Thursday would have never entered Germany had her party been in power. Weidel placed the blame for the incident at the door of the Bavarian premier, Markus Söder, saying the question which politicians need to face, especially Söder, is what was the man even doing here? These guys, I think, get so anytime an instance of mass violence occurs, they're like, oh, hell yeah. It's time to use this as our opportunity. Why didn't the media cover the Swedish mass shooter? Because he was white. The media did cover it. But just briefly. And unfortunately, the reality of the matter is that right-wing sentiment is what dominates polite discourse and just discourse in general. Yeah. When it's a far-right white guy doing an act of terror, then it's like, oh, well, it's a lone wolf. Why are you politicizing this? There's nothing to be said about the right-wing radicalization. When it's a random Muslim person, okay, or an Afghan refugee, they're like, oh, this is how they all are. Notice that nobody says this is how they all are about white people, obviously, because that's not the case. Just like that's not the case for the millions of Muslim refugees that work and live normal lives in Germany every single day, in spite of the anti-Islam sentiment that you hear from many German politicians.
The Gazans, who have endured more than a year of suffering, and the hostage family.
Don't spread misinfo. There's no known agenda yet. The Deutsche Welle article is misleading. He doesn't have permanent residency. In fact, his asylum application got rejected at first. He had a restricted residency, and he was only allowed to stay by formality because they didn't decide whether they will extend his residency. Yeah. The Swedish fellow disappeared from the news. Yeah. The initial coverage also had like photos of like a random Arab-looking person too. And then, yeah, when they realized the dude was white, they were like, okay, never mind, my B. Sorry about that. Anyway, I'm not saying this is like there is a intrinsic quality to violence that only impacts like white people or some shit. I'm not saying that at all. I'm simply explaining that everyone is capable of violence, okay? Right-wingers, specifically, are very capable of violence. And oftentimes, what? Can you address repeating mass murders in Germany without calling people racist, fascist? This is becoming disrespectful for non-immigrants. White people are also humans, you know? I love that right-wingers pretend that the only solution to an act of terror is by being Islamophobic. Like that's, you're making it seem as though if you say, you know, this is just Islam, this is how all Muslims are, then you magically solve this problem. You're an idiot. What are you talking about? Yes. People ask me, how do you fix this problem? And I tell them it's the same principle. All instances of violence like this, with the exception of like the antisocial personality disorder caused instances of violence, are solvable through addressing the material problems that people have. Okay, this is not a unique position. This is just the truth. That's it. Also, this guy said white people are human too, as though I, a white man, don't think that.
Families who say that time is running out to release their loved ones.